Diana was born into privilege, the only child of Chief and Madame Okoro, a power couple in Anambra State. Her father was a renowned businessman, controlling vast estates, while her mother owned a chain of luxurious fashion and houses across Nigeria and South Africa. Their success was undeniable, their wealth enviable. But for Diana, life was nothing but a golden cage. Her parents were rarely home, they were chasing deals and expanding their empire, leaving their only child to be raised by maids, tutors, and an ever-changing roster of drivers. To the outside world, she was a spoiled, pampered princess, but inside, she was just a lonely girl desperate for parental love and care. She grew up in a mansion filled with silence, where family dinners were replaced with notes left on the dining table. Traveling to Abuja. Be good. In London for business. Call the maid if you need anything. To crown it all, she was homeschooled and didn't have any friends. By the time she was 11, she had learnt a bitter truth: money could buy everything except love. At 12, her parents sent her to an average boarding school in Lagos, believing it would build her character. Instead, it broke her. The moment she stepped into the school compound, her parents' wealth became a curse. The other students saw her as a privileged outsider, someone who didn't belong. Her clothes were too new, her provisions too expensive, and her accent too polished. Their jealousy turned into resentment. Resentment turned into cruelty. They mocked her for her soft life, for never fetching water or scrubbing floors like the rest of them. They laughed at how she never ran out of snacks or had to beg for pocket money. They would call her Money Miss Road. Omo rich man child, where your bodyguards? You no go suffer small? It was verbal attacks until it became physical. One of the students who hated her the most was Amora, a girl from a struggling background who despised Diana's easy life. Amora didn't just dislike Diana, she wanted to ruin her. One night, when Diana was 13, Amora lured her into an empty dormitory, claiming she wanted to talk. She didn't know it was a trap. Waiting inside were 4 older boys, their faces twisted with anticipation. Amora had planned everything. Diana barely had time to scream before they grabbed her. The last thing she saw before the nightmare began was Amora's satisfied smirk. When it was over, she lay on the cold floor, bleeding, shaking, broken. And Amora just laughed and said, "Now you're just like the rest of us." Diana couldn't tell anybody what happened because no one, not even her parents, would believe nor fight for her. After the sexual assault, Diana became a ghost, drifting through school with dead eyes and a hollow soul. But the world wasn't done with her yet. In SS2, she transferred to another school, hoping for a fresh start. That was where she met Tommy. Unlike Amora, Tommy wasn't cruel out of jealousy, she was cruel because she enjoyed power. She led a gang of mean girls, and Diana, with her quiet nature and fear-ridden aura, became their favorite target. One day, during an argument, Tommy snapped. She and her girls dragged Diana behind the school building and beat her senseless. They didn't stop until her face was swollen, her ribs ached, and her body screamed in agony. A heavy plank cracked against her head, sending her vision into darkness. She woke up days later in a hospital with a shattered knee and broken arm. When her parents tried to ask her what happened, she lied to them, telling them she fell. She was scared of what Tommy would do if she confessed. Tommy had ruined her body, just like Amora had ruined her soul. She was alone. By the time Diana was 20, she had given up on the idea of friendship, trust, or love. Diana entered university. She had learnt one thing: people were cruel, and love was a lie. She no longer expected kindness. She kept to herself, moving like a shadow in the crowded streets of Lagos, where she studied accounting at the prestigious landmark university. But then came Faith. Faith was beautiful, with an innocent face and a silver tongue that could make the devil himself pause. She had a way of making people trust her. Diana met her during their 300-level days. Faith had nowhere to stay, and everyone in their hostel knew it. She had come from a struggling background. She was in the university based on scholarship, her father had died in an accident, she had barely scraped through her first semester, sleeping in different rooms, begging for shelter wherever she could find it. One night, as rain poured heavily over Lagos, Faith sat outside, shivering, with nowhere to go. Diana, despite everything, felt pity. She let Faith move into her room, sleep in her bed, eat her food, and even wear her clothes. For the first time since childhood, Diana thought she had found someone who wouldn't hurt her. Someone who understood suffering. They became inseparable. They helped each other with assignments, Diana bought her food, and even gave her monthly allowances from the money her parents sent, money she had no emotional attachment to, since her parents used it to replace their absence. Faith never lacked, because Diana provided for her. But that was the problem. Faith, once grateful, began to resent the fact that Diana never struggled like she did. She envied the way money flowed into Diana's account effortlessly. She hated how Diana never seemed desperate for things like she was. Faith had come into Diana's life as a helpless girl in need of a friend. But over time, jealousy turned her heart black. Faith started changing. She would borrow Diana's money and never return it. She would wear Diana's expensive clothes and take pictures, pretending they were hers. She began telling people that Diana was a spoiled brat who didn't deserve the life she had. But Diana was too used to betrayal to notice. She had learned to ignore red flags, because she had spent her entire life surrounded by them. And then, one day, Faith decided that simply hating Diana wasn't enough. She wanted to destroy her. By their final year, Faith had made new friends, girls who had no idea who Diana really was, girls who only knew the twisted version of her that Faith had created. And one day, she came up with a plan. She convinced the others to follow her to the market where Diana usually shopped. She made sure Diana was alone. Then, as Diana was paying a vendor, one of Faith's friends screamed, "Thief! She stole from my bag." The market women reacted instantly. Before Diana could speak, before she could understand what was happening, her hands were dragged to the ground. Slaps. Kicks. Spit in her face. Her clothes were ripped, her body stomped on, and then someone screamed, "Let's burn her." Someone poured petrol on her shoulders. Someone else lit a match. The fire crawled up her skin, eating her flesh, melting her body. She screamed. She burned, and through the flames, through the agony, she saw Faith standing in the crowd, watching and smiling. Faith never tried to stop them. She never blinked. She just turned around and walked away, leaving Diana to die. The police arrived seconds before death claimed her, dragging her body out of the flames, rushing her to the nearest hospital. When they finally reached out to Diana's parents, they wired money first. By the time they arrived at the hospital, Diana had already changed. The burns had disfigured her body, but what hurt more was the scar inside her soul. She didn't cry when she saw them. She just lay there, staring at them with empty eyes, waiting for them to do what they always did. Throw money at the problem. Her father made some calls. Her mother sighed, barely able to look at her ruined body. "We'll fix this," her father said. "We'll take you out of this country. Get you the best treatment money can buy." They didn't ask her, "How do you feel? Who did this to you?" Just solutions. No emotions. The next week, she was flown out of Nigeria to Switzerland for intensive medical treatment at a private hospital in Geneva, one of the most expensive in the world. The hospital was immaculate, like something out of a dream. For months, they worked on her body, skin grafts, physical therapy and pain management. She lay in that hospital bed, day after day, watching her body transform under the hands of strangers. Her skin, once soft and smooth, was now a battlefield of scars. Her left leg, twisted and weak, it would never be the same. She had to learn how to live again, and she did. Not because she wanted to, but because she had unfinished business. After a year of treatment, her father relocated her permanently to London, setting her up in a penthouse, with full-time caregivers. Her parents rarely visited. She spent years in London, trapped in wealth, but her mind was never there. Her mind was back in Nigeria. Back with the three demons who ruined her life. Amora, Tommy, and Faith. She spent those years researching them, tracking their lives, watching them thrive while she suffered. Her anger became fuel, her pain became purpose, until finally, she was ready. She returned to Nigeria, and began her plotting of revenge. It required patience, calculation, and the right person to execute it. That was when she found Emeka. It happened in Anambra. She had returned to her parents' house. She began to search for someone who could help her exact her vendetta. Someone smart, corny, unpredictable, and, most importantly, unknown to her enemies. One fateful afternoon, she was sitting in the corner of a rundown lounge, sipping on wine, when she noticed a commotion. A group of men, clearly hoodlums, were in the middle of an argument over money. There was tension in the air, and violence seemed inevitable. Then, he appeared. Emeka strolled into the scene like a man who had nothing to fear. His movements were calculated, his smirk unwavering. With just a few slick words and well-placed lies. Within minutes, the argument dissolved, and he walked away with their money and their trust, making them believe he had done them a favor. Diana watched everything unfold. She was intrigued. This was the man she needed. Later that night, she followed him to a secluded part of town, waiting for the right moment. When he finally noticed her, he chuckled. "You've been watching me all day," he said, lighting a cigarette. "What do you want?" She stepped forward, her hoodie covering part of her scarred face. "A partner." He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Boo? And what kind of business are we talking about?" She pulled out 3 photographs of Amora, Faith and Tommy, and handed them to him. "I want them to suffer," she said. "And I need someone new. A fresh face. Someone they won't suspect." He studied the pictures, then looked back at her. "Sounds personal." "It is." A slow grin spread across his face. "Good. I like personal. So what's the plan?" And so, their partnership began. For over a year, they planned meticulously, learning every detail about their targets. Their schedules, weaknesses, fears. Nothing was left to chance. Now, after several months of plotting, the time had finally come, and Diana was ready to make them pay. A single dim bulb shined above, casting shadows. Then they saw her. She had locked them inside the warehouse with no means of escape from the darkness. Diana stepped forward with 3 hefty men wearing masks. Her disfigured skin was illuminated under the weak light, the scars telling stories without words. Her walking step funny due to the twisted ankle thanks to Tommy. Her burned skin due to Faith's doing, stretched tightly over her body. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Amora screamed, Faith gasped, eyes widening in recognition. "No, no, this isn't possible." Tommy's body trembled. "Diana." Diana let the name hang in the air before chuckling. "Ah, you do remember me." She stepped closer, dragging a chair behind her, the screeching sound of metal against concrete piercing the silence. She sat down, crossing her legs slowly. "You stole my body. My dignity. My future," she whispered. "And yet, here I am. And here you are." Amora tried to be bold. "Whatever this is, you need to let us go. This isn't the way." Diana tilted her head. "The way? The way was when you watched me get gang raped. When you made sure my screams meant nothing." Amora flinched. Diana turned to Tommy. "And you? The Queen of Fists. You broke my bones, ruined my leg. Because of you my posture is this way forever." She exhaled slowly. "How does it feel to be powerless?" Tommy couldn't even form words. Finally, Diana's gaze landed on Faith, who was shaking. "You," Diana whispered. "You almost got me killed. All for a what? Tell me. Was it worth it?" Faith sobbed. I didn't mean to." Diana's voice turned sharp. "You lied." She stood up, walking behind them, dragging her fingers across their shoulders. "You had your time to be monsters. Now, it's my turn. The torment begins." Her men bundled Amora, strapped her down to a steel chair and blindfolded her. Amora's screams echoed through the abandoned warehouse, but the sound was swallowed by the vast emptiness around her. Diana sat in a chair before her, calm, patient, like a god overseeing judgment. She rose to her feet and walked towards the metal tray beside her, where red-hot branding irons glowed in a furnace. She picked one up, feeling the scorching heat, even without touching it. "You planned it," she murmured, trailing her fingers over Amora's trembling chin. "For boys, locked me in a room and raped me. Do you know how long it took me to even be able to speak about it, without breaking?" Amora pleading with muffled cries, her mouth was stuffed with a rag soaked in something foul. Diana took a deep breath, then pressed the glowing iron against Amora's stomach. The sizzling flesh filled the air with a putrid stench. Amora cried out, her screams muffled but still piercing, her back arching against the pain. Diana watched, expressionless, as Amora cried, the brand carving a blackened scar across her once perfect skin. "You like marking people, don't you?" Diana whispered, tilting her head. "You marked me that night. Let me return the favor." She lifted another branding iron, this one shaped like a twisted letter D. "For Diana." And she pressed it to Amora's chest, just above her left breast. The sound of burning flesh, the choking, cries, the stench of seared skin, it was all too familiar. But it wasn't enough. Diana tossed the iron aside and grabbed a knife from the tray. "I want you to feel what it's like to have something taken from you, that you can never get back." She leaned in close, her whispers ice-cold against Amora's ear. "I'm going to take your beauty." And then she pressed the blade to Amora's cheek and began to carve into her flesh, laughing hysterically as she peeled off the skin on Amora's face. She moved to Tommy. She was tied to a table. Diana shattered her kneecap and her arms with a hammer, slowly, methodically. One hammer strike at a time, Tommy screamed until her voice cracked. She would never walk the same way again. Finally she looked at Faith. There was only one fitting punishment. Fire. Diana held up a matchstick, watching the small flame dance. "Tell me, Faith, do you know what burning flesh smells like?" Faith shrieked. "Please." Diana smiled. "No, that would be too easy," she said as she struck another match. A tiny flame flickered to life, its glow reflecting in her cold, dead eyes. "I should set you ablaze, just like you did to me," she mused. "But I have something better in mind." She let the match burn for a moment, then tossed it onto the floor. The kerosene trail caught instantly, a circle of fire erupting around Faith. The heat was immediate. The flames danced closer and closer, licking at the edges of her chair. Sweat poured down Faith's face, her eyes darting wildly, panic overtaking her. Then came the real horror. Diana picked up a rusted branding iron from the fire and held it up, watching as the red-hot metal glowed ominously. "You see, Faith, you stole my beauty. My skin is scarred forever. So now, I'll make sure you never forget me." Faith screamed with all her might, her body convulsing, pure terror flooding her veins. Diana didn't hesitate. With a horrifying sizzle, she pressed the branding iron one by one into Faith's collarbone, her thighs, back, chest and every visible point on Faith's body. Faith's muffled screams turned into a loud wail as the stench of burning flesh filled the air. The pain was unimaginable, a rapid agony that spread through her entire body. Then, without another word, she picked up a bucket of salt water and slowly poured it over Faith's burns. Faith's soul left her body. The pain was unimaginable. She screamed so hard, the chair screeched against the floor, her muffled screams turning into choked gurgles. Then she passed out. Diana stood up, wiping sweat from her forehead. Faith wasn't dead. Not yet, but she would wake up scarred, broken, ruined just like Diana had been, and that was the true revenge. Diana didn't want them to die, just suffer, not just physically but in a way that would eat at them for the rest of their miserable lives. Death was too merciful. She needed something slow, inescapable, a curse they would carry till their last breath. Emeka didn't have HIV, but that didn't matter. She had spent years preparing for this. She paid a corrupt lab technician, a man drowning in debt, to secure syringes filled with blood from advanced stage HIV patients. The blood was stored carefully, preserved just enough to remain infectious. Emeka had drugged the ladies, and when the moment was right, he would inject them with the tainted blood without them ever noticing. Diana left them at the warehouse broken, bleeding, and in pains, but alive because death would be mercy. As Diana walked out of the warehouse, Emeka stood outside, leaning against his car, smoking. He smirked. "So, do you feel better?" "Not yet. But I will." She got into the car, and together, they disappeared into the night.